Hello, welcome to this short psychology topic video called Practical Approaches to Teach Issues and Debates in Year 2 Psychology. Quite a packed webinar this evening for you with lots of sort of practical hints and tips, hopefully make issues and debates come alive in your psychology classroom. Just in case you've missed them, we've had two other webinars this week already. One on Sunday last week called What the Examiner Said and How to Respond for Summer 2017, where we took an in-depth look at the exam from this year's AS exams, just to see what mistakes we can learn from. And then a second webinar on Thursday called Energising Students in the Year 1 Psychology Classroom, where we looked at sort of four of my favourite lessons that I use in Year 1 that really sort of create a buzz in the psychology classroom. Both of those videos and all of the resources are available on our psychology channel now. So if you've missed those, you can check back and look them on the TutorTube website. Two more webinars coming up this week. We've got one on Tuesday at 8:30 titled Encourage Your Students to Fall in Love with Relationships, where we'll look at some really fun ways that you can teach the different theories and topics in relationships. And then on Wednesday, we're going to start the first of our Mastering Research Methods series, which is aimed at both students and teachers. And we're going to start by revisiting the sign test this week, and then we're going to thereafter look at all the inferential statistic tests that occur in Year 2 Psychology. So a great one for yourself and your students if you can make it. Just as a quick reminder, we've got two face-to-face CPD events coming up this week, or this week and next week. We've got one in Birmingham on Friday the 23rd of September, one in London on the 30th. And these days are a packed, resourced-filled day with over 40 active teaching and learning materials to try out and have fun with on the day, network with some psychology colleagues, and really go back feeling hopefully energised when you return to the classroom. Now, in terms of today, there are three main aims for this particular session on issues and debates. The first one, I want to start by analysing issues and debates, so taking a sort of detailed look at the specification, and probably more importantly, looking at the types of questions that AQA can ask in this part of the exam. Thereafter, I want to look at mapping the issues and debates to the approaches topic, and hopefully you'll see some logic in that later on, and start by sort of taking a look at the key terms, which is very, very heavy in the issues and debates topic. Then look at how we can compare issues and debates with approaches, and then look at the difference between comparison and evaluation, two different skills that students will need in this particular topic. And then we'll finish off by mapping the issues and debates to the Year 1 and Year 2 topics and look at some teaching and learning materials that will hopefully bring that aspect of the course to life as well, and hopefully make you feel more confident delivering this area of the course. Okay, so let's make a start by analysing the issues and debates, and we'll start by just having a quick overview of the specification, which you can see on screen now. What you'll see is that there are 6 components within the issues and debates topic, starting with gender and culture, where you're going to explore gender bias and cultural bias. Then you move on to free will and determinism, and there you'll see that there are 2 types of determinism in terms of making a distinction between hard and soft determinism. But students also need to be aware of 3 different types of determinism: biological, environmental and psychic determinism. So already we've got lots of key terms just in the first 2 points of the spec. Then you've got the nature versus nurture debate, probably one of the most famous, but you also need to be aware of the interactionist approach, the idea that most psychologists now take both elements of that debate and form an interactionist approach to the nature-nurture argument. Then you've got holism versus reductionism, and more keywords in there. So you've got biological reductionism and environmental reductionism. Then you've got ideographic versus nomothetic, which is something that the AQA teachers may be less familiar with at present. And then last but not least, and I just want to spend a moment on this one, you've got ethical implications of research. And it's really important for me to just stress, although we're not going to spend much time on that today, if any, that ethical implications are not ethical guidelines. They're not the same thing, okay? So when the specification talks about ethical implications, what it's talking about is how research is concerned with the way in which research impacts the people taking part, the participants, and the way that the results of the research are then communicated to the wider world and the public. In particular, the idea of socially sensitive research. And what socially sensitive research is, for those of you who are not aware, it's research that has the potential to cause the individuals or the participants that took part, or the group of people they represent, harm potentially in some way. So to give you a sort of a very crude example, if biological psychologists were to find a gene for homosexuality, the implications of that, the ethical implications, could be huge, and that's what ethical implications is referring to. Now, what I've done for you, and we'll explore some of these in more detail in a moment, is I've mapped out all of the issues and debates questions to the different that occur in the sample papers, to the different topics in issues and debates, just so you can start to see the types of questions that emerge. And really, these types of questions are broken into 5 different types. You've got the short answer definition questions, you've got the short answer evaluation questions, probably more tricky, you've got application questions that are quite hard in this section. I think they're really tough. You've then got essay questions and compare and contrast essays, so a different type of essay. Interestingly, you'll see highlighted on the screen there is only one essay that appears in the sample paper for issues and debates, and that's on nature nurture, but it's quite logical when you look at the specification that more essays could occur, and I'm going to point out a few different types today. So in terms of a definition short answer question, this is the type of thing I mean. So with reference to an extract, explain what is meant by determinism, and refer to 3 types of determinism in your answer. So you can see straight away there the importance on specialist terminology. They have to know all 3 types of determinism to be able to successfully answer that question. An evaluation short answer question. So briefly outline one problem associated with alpha bias and one problem associated with beta bias. Again, the emphasis on knowing the key terminology within this topic is huge. An application question. I'm just showing you one. I will read it out because I think it's actually quite a hard question. It says a prison psychologist used an ideographic approach to study offending. He asked 2 offenders to record their thoughts about their childhood and their offending behaviour in a journal over a period of 4 weeks. Qualitative analysis of the journals showed that the offenders often thought about sad childhood events and believed that their childhood experiences had influenced their offending. Findings from ideographic research, like the study described above, are often used as the basis for other investigations. And then you get onto the question. Explain how researchers might develop the above investigation through taking a non-methetic approach, 6 marks. So clearly a detailed knowledge of ideographic versus non-methetics required to even attempt this question, and a really tricky application question, I think. Last but not least, and really where the focus of this session is going to be on today, is different types of essays. So here is a sort of classic issues and debates style essay. So it says here the best way to understand and explain behaviour is to reduce it to its simplest component parts. In the context of holism versus reductionism, discuss this view and refer to at least one topic in your answer. Now I'm going to leave a question hanging for the moment. Why can't the one topic that we refer to in our answer be the approaches topic? Because that's one we all have to study. So I'm just going to leave that there. Likewise, I want to look at an approaches essay now. This one says, outline the psychodynamic approach in psychology. Discuss one or more differences between the psychodynamic approach and the humanist approach, 8 marks. And I want to throw the opposite question there, that why can't the discussion for this essay on approaches be centred on issues and debates? And really this is going to be the key theme of this particular webinar, that if we're using issues and debates, why can't we bring in our approaches? And if we're discussing issues and debates, why can't we flip it around and bring in the approaches this time around? Bring in the issues and debates this time around. So those are the 2 sort of key questions I'm going to keep referring to. So there we have it. That's the specification and the types of questions that our AQA might ask. So what we're going to move on to now is mapping the issues and debates to the approaches, and 4 kind of key subsections here: understanding the key terms, comparing the issue debates with approaches, and a nice sorting task, and then the difference between comparison and evaluation. Now, apologies if you've seen one of the earlier webinars. We have used this activity before, but it's important for those of you that haven't been in a webinar previously just to be aware of this activity, because it's a perfect one for this part of the course. Now, the key to this activity, in my view, is that students can, of course, only really use issues and debates effectively anywhere in psychology if they know the terms explicitly. And this activity is called Issues and Debates Quiz Trade, and it's really, really simple. And if you've not come across it before, the idea is really simple. So you print off the 9 cards, which there are, and you give 1 to every student in your class, and you'll need duplicates. If you've got more than 9 students, that's perfect, that's what you want. And the idea is that students stand up, they wander around, find a pair. One student asks their question, for example, what is meant by the term nature. The other student attempts to answer. It's important, whether or not the person gets it right, that the student with the card reads out the correct answer every single time to reinforce the correct definition. They then swap roles. Once they've both done that, they then swap cards over and they wander off and find a new pair and repeat the process. After about 10-15 minutes or so, they'll be very good at having memorised a lot of those key terms, which will give them a good basis for the rest of this topic. And you can keep coming back to this activity time and time again. Now, that's just to get the key terms consolidated. I now want to return to these two essays, the issues and debates essay and the approaches essay, because as you can clearly see from the screen, what I'm trying to get at here is why can't we use approaches in our sort of evaluation to issues and debates, and our issues and debates as part of our evaluation to approaches? Now, probably what you're thinking at this stage is, wouldn't it be lovely if we had a massive table, an A2 or an A3 size table, with all of that information in it? And absolutely, I agree, and that's what I've put together here. So this is just a very generic outline of a table where we've got all of the different approaches in the left-hand side column, and all of the issues and debates across the top. You're probably now thinking, wouldn't it be great if someone took the time to fill that table in? Because I'm a teacher, I certainly don't have the time to be doing that, and we've done that for you again. And what you can see here is what we've deliberately done at Tutor to You is use all of the specialist key terms that occur and been really specific, because I think that's an important element to issues and debates. So, although you probably can't see it, free will versus determinism, biological determinism we put in straight away, environmental determinism we put in for the behaviourist approach, and so on and so forth. And we've explained each one of these and mapped it out to the issues, debates and approaches. Now, you're probably thinking I should have gone to Specsavers, so I'm going to zoom in for you. And let's just take a look at a couple of these, just to illustrate what I mean. So let's just take the first two, biological and behaviourist, those two rows. And you'll see here that free will versus determinism. What I've done is I've put in bold the key terminology. So obviously for the biological approach, they believe in a biological determinism point of view. And this is the idea that the biological approach suggests that our behaviour is controlled by factors, for example, genes, neurotransmitters, hormones, brain structures, and so forth. The behaviourist approach, on the other hand, is also deterministic, but it believes in a determinism called environmental determinism. And this suggests that our behaviour is determined by stimulus and response conditioning, for example, classical and or operant conditioning. Let's take another one. Let's look at reductionism versus holism, sticking with biological and behaviourism. So with biological reductionism, the biological approach reduces all behaviour down to physical biological structures and processes, ignoring the holistic view, so ignoring the whole. Behaviourism also takes a reductionist approach, but in a different way. They take an environmental reductionism approach, and they reduce behaviour down to just simple stimulus and response associations. Take one more, ideographic versus nomothetic. Both of these approaches take a nomothetic approach. The biological approach suggests that humans share a similar physiology, and therefore we can make universal laws about human behaviour. And the behaviourist approach tries to generate general laws of behaviour, cause and effect types of responses in relation to stimulus and stimulus response relationships. Both the approaches use lab experiments. They both try and gather quantitative data, and they both try and generalise this behaviour to humankind, so to speak. So you can see how the table works. I've just zoomed into a few to give you a flavour there. However, what I think makes this table so useful as a learning opportunity, and certainly don't give your students the completed copy of this, you want to work your way through this table, you don't want to just hand them the answers on a plate, is that actually this table can be used to tackle the essays in both the approaches section and the issues and debates section. So if we think about looking across the rows, the students can use the rows to evaluate the essays within the approaches topic. Okay. So if we think back to that question, the best way to understand and explain human behaviour is reduce it to its simple component parts. In the context of holism versus reductionism, discuss this view and refer to at least one topic. This table then gives them access to refer to any of the approaches within the approaches topic, biological, behaviourism, social learning theory, etc., and effectively answer that question. What makes the table even better is that if we then look down the columns, this is where it provides us with an opportunity to examine similarities and differences between the different issues and debates. Okay, so if we think about that second question, okay, which said outline the psychodynamic approach, discuss one or more differences, we can now answer this approaches essay, okay, by actually looking down the table and comparing what is similar and different between them. Okay, so this table is sort of multifaceted in the sense that you can answer two different topics within this. You can answer issues and debates questions, you can answer approaches questions. Okay. Now, what I've also done, because I probably can hear most of you saying in the background useful, but you've got all the answers there, is I've also created a second version of this in yellow, so you don't mix the two up. And the yellow one, rather than actually saying the biological approach believes in biological determinism, for example, it's made the cells generic in the sense that students would have to read it and work out where they appear. And what this means is that you can use this table as a much better activity, as some type of sorting task at the end of the topic to really consolidate learning. Okay. So just to show you how that might work, and this is why I've called this activity sorting out issues and debates once and for all. The aim is really just to consolidate their knowledge. So I wouldn't do this early on. I would wait until you've taught the issues and debates and you've taught all of the approaches, and then use this as a really nice sort of finishing piece where they have all the information mapped out in a huge table that will enable them to answer many, many different types of essay questions, whether they're in the approaches topic or whether they're in the issues and debates topic. Now what you'll see is that all the different cards that then go with this activity have been made generic, so they can't work it out without reading into them. Okay, that means they'll need to understand it. I've also unbolded all of the words so that they can then use this to highlight what they think the key words are, and then really start to pinpoint where the similarities and differences are between them. Okay. Now it doesn't stop there, because I think one of the difficulties students will face is actually effectively comparing or contrasting, because they're so used to writing evaluation that I can almost see the examiner's commentary already saying that students had an inability to compare and contrast. And therefore this next activity, which is just called how to compare and contrast effectively, is aimed to give your students a framework or a template that they're familiar with that will enable them to go on and produce effective comparisons or effective contrasts. Okay, and really it's using a familiar technique, the Berger technique, but this time turning one of them into a comparison, which I've put in blue on the screen here, and then turning one of them into a contrasting paragraph, which I put in sort of I'm not sure what colour that is, orange or red it was meant to be. So let's see how that looks, because we're familiar with this idea of point, evidence, or example, and then explain. So P paragraph, which we frame around this Berger. Students like it and they're familiar with it. But this time around, what we need to do, if it is a sort of contrast style essay, we need to make the students aware that the way they word it is crucial, because we want it to be a proper contrast, not a generic evaluation point. So all I've done is provided sort of a writing frame for students to use within the Berger template. And it starts with one difference between the something approach and the other approach is. They then move on to their example, which is where they talk about the first of their two approaches. They might say the psychodynamic approach suggests, and then they go on to, in the explain, to point out the difference, but they must use a sort of contrasting word. However, the humanist approach suggests, and then they go on to explain their second approach. Now, this is where the beauty of the table comes back in, because if they've completed this, if we now zoom in, so we know we're going to be using the columns, we zoom into psychodynamic and humanist, what we'll see is that actually straight away, but just by looking at those two sort of columns, we've got huge number of opportunities to compare and contrast. And straight away we can see, well, actually the psychodynamic approach believes in psychic determinism. Humanism is the only approach that promotes free will. The psychodynamic approach is mostly nature. The humanist approach is mostly nurture. Perfect. We've got two contrasts straight away. Let's take one of those and put that into that Berger paragraph. Really straightforward. Then one difference between the psychodynamic approach and the humanist approach is the extent to which they argue that our behaviour is determined. So we're talking about free will determinism. The psychodynamic approach suggests that behaviour is determined by unconscious drives, for example, the id and early childhood experiences, and this is an idea known as psychic determinism. And then the explain is, well, what's different then? However, the humanist approach suggests that humans control their own environment. They are capable of some change, and therefore the humanist approach argues that humans have free will, while the psychodynamic approach suggests that our behaviour is determined. And it's as simple as that. So there we have it. So a range of activities. The first one just to get students familiar with the key terms, and then a huge sort of table of activities, so to speak, that will allow you to hopefully effectively compare issues, debates and approaches, and have that beautifully mapped out in one place so that you're confident and your students are confident with that. Okay, last but not least, I want to look at mapping now the issues and the debates to the Year 1 and Year 2 topics, because it's all well and good to be able to map them to one another, but actually we want to also expand out of that and map it to the different topics, and I think this is really important, so we'll explore a few ideas about how to do this. So if we was to take, for example, any part of the specifications, let's just take social because it's the very first one. What you want to get to a stage is where your students can now look at the different issues and debates using the sort of grenade poster and actually start to think, well, where does these different issues and debates apply to my Year 1 learning? I'm just going to do one for you as an example. So let's think types of conformity. We might say, well, there's a clear gender bias in the research because Ash conducted his research with male participants and he therefore assumed the findings would generalise to females. That's known as a beta bias. We've then got, if we look at second point in the social spec, we've got Zimbardo and conformity to social roles. And there we've got gender bias and beta bias again, because Zimbardo did exactly the same as Ash. He tested male participants and he assumed the findings were generalised to females. Then if we look at explanations for obedience, we've got cultural bias, because we can then just change it up a little bit and say, well, Milgram conducted his research in the US, and actually replications of the Milgram study show that there are cultural differences across the world, so his findings were culturally biased towards the US. We could look at the dispositional explanations of obedience, which was using the Adorno F scale for authoritarian personality, and that's taking a nomothetic approach because it believes we can measure a personality characteristic using a psychometric test, a questionnaire of some description. You're starting to get the idea, I hope. And then finally, minority influence, an interesting idea, but one I was thinking about today. You could argue about experimental reductionism, because what minority influence does is tries to reduce a really complex behaviour down to isolated variables like group size, and actually the process is far more complicated than that. So there we have it, just one of the year one topics. We could do exactly the same if we wanted for year two topics, and I think this is even more interesting. It gives us such a sense of sort of evaluation within these parts of the courses, that if we take relationships, one of sort of my favourite topics, and I know one that most teachers are probably looking at this year, if we look at evolutionary explanations for relationships, we've got two keys in there, straight away: biological determinism and social sensitivity. So we could argue that partner preferences according to evolution are due to genetic influences being passed down over thousands of generations, etc., and that's biological determinism. We could also say that the research is socially sensitive because it can, to some extent, justify male behaviours like promiscuity and so forth. We could look at attraction and say, well, that's a nomothetic approach, because filter theory in particular tries to generate a general law about how we use filters to narrow down a field of available people into a field of selectives, or whatever they're called. We could look at romantic relationships, and we've got two again in here. So we've got cultural bias for certain. And this is the idea that most of the research into romantic relationships actually is carried out in Western societies. And we know that actually some of these theories do not apply to other cultures, especially cultures that have arranged marriage. And you start to see where I'm going with this. We can map it almost out and issue and debate to every single point in the specification. Now, rather than me do that, because I could quite easily come up with something for everything, I'd imagine, I think this is a perfect opportunity to get your students to do the work, because they'll understand it so much more. So what I've put together today is a series, I think it's 15 in total, 15 different student topic tables, one for every single one of the topics in year one, minus research methods, because that doesn't really work here, and then every single optional unit in year two, so you can select the 3 that you will need. I've put that together as a PDF for you, so you can use that with your students. Now, the way I would go about using this is to then use this grenade poster, and I think your students should definitely have a copy of this in their folder somewhere. And this is the one we at Tutor have designed this year. We've taken the idea from elsewhere, but we've mapped it out to this year's specification. Okay, and the point here is that you'd want to be getting your students to sort of ask themselves the questions in this table to see if they can complete the grids for both year one and year two topics. And I think this will be a really great exercise to get them thinking about how can we apply these different issues and debates to all of the different topics in year one, and then consequently year two. Last but not least, just to show you sort of a small activity where you could really sort of embed this into your lessons, and it's an activity called Issues and Debates in Relationships, and it's really just to encourage this idea of applying knowledge of issues and debates to any one of the topics. Actually, I've chosen relationships for this, but you could see this activity working in whatever topic you've chosen. A couple of ways you could do this, but a really nice simple way would be to provide your students with a copy of that grenade poster. Make sure they've got that with them. Then use a spinner. You can use willdecide.com, where you put in all of the different letters of grenade. Okay, so you've got your gender bias, you've got your ethnocentrism, etc., all mapped out to the wheel. You then very simply spin the wheel, and whichever sort of section it lands on, so in this case nature nurture, you would get your students to see if they can apply their knowledge of nature nurture to something in the relationships topic. And I'd be really cruel that when you spin the wheel again, they can't reuse the same topic again. So if they've done filter theory for the first point, they couldn't use it again, and see just how long it is before they start to struggle to do this. But a really, really great and really fun activity you could try. So there we have it. So that's how you can map issues and debates to your year one, year two topics. And you, hopefully through this, you've got a nice range of activities that will get your students thinking about issues and debates in a much more sort of positive way. As always, all the resources today are available straight away on our Facebook group, as well as if you're not on Facebook, they'll be sent out tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock as part of our daily digest, so do look out for those. And as always, if you've got any questions or queries, please don't hesitate to ask in the Facebook groups we've set up deliberately. And also feel free to drop me an email directly. I'm more than happy to provide any sort of advice, guidance, support on anything we've covered today. Thanks for listening and enjoy the rest of your evening.